Duckworth. Kenneth Duckworth. Kenny was a young boy growing up in the streets of Chicago, during which he was in a relationship with a girl called Paula Olivia. There were often tensions between the two, as Kenny was involved in a gang and was often getting into difficult situations. After they had grown a bit older, Paula gave Kenny an ultimatum to leave the gang life behind and move out of Chicago with her, or she would leave him, which Kenny agreed to do. So, the two of them left Compton, California, with almost no money between them. After 3 years of living in Compton, working odd jobs, Kenny for KFC and Paula for McDonald's, on the 17th of June 1987, their son, Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, was born. Kendrick didn't have an easy childhood, having to live off of welfare, food stamps, and even being homeless at one point. Apparently, as a child, Kendrick's mother even described him as a lonely child, as he was an only child until the age of 7 when his brother was born, eventually then having another brother and a sister. As a child growing up in the dangerous areas of Compton, Kendrick did, of course, come into contact with gang culture. However, he himself never joined one. Kendrick got into rap inspired by the likes of Tupac, Dr. Dre, and all of the other popular hip-hop artists of the time. And at school, Kendrick started freestyling and began to realize not only that he wasn't too bad, but also the fact that he loved doing it. Kendrick, at just 16 years of age, released his first ever mixtape under the name K. Compared to his music now, the mixtape is very bad. However, it was good enough at the time that it got him signed to Top Dog Entertainment, making him the first signing by the founder of the label, Anthony Tiffith. After being signed and 3 more mixtape releases, C4 even having a song co-signed by Lil Wayne, Kendrick released his final mixtape, Overly Dedicated, finally dropping the K. name and releasing it under his birth name, Kendrick Lamar. After just under 1 year of Overly Dedicated release, on the 2nd of July 2011, Kendrick released his first ever studio album, Section 80. Section 80 is an album that is centered a lot around the struggles that Kendrick experienced, especially in his younger years. The name of the album comes from 2 things, Section 8 housing and the fact that Kendrick was born in the 80s. This 16-track, 59-minute and 44-second long album contains and discusses many deep, mature, and adult themes, mainly being drug abuse, more specifically things like the crack epidemic which Kendrick lived through, racism, sexism, injustice, and political issues. In the opening song of this album, Fuck Your Ethnicity, Kendrick introduces these 2 characters, Keisha and Tammy. And Kendrick uses these 2 characters throughout the album to reflect the issues and themes that run through. In the song, he also talks about how he knows that his fans are very diverse, and so he doesn't care about your race, background, or anything else. Anyone can relate to his music, essentially him telling you, fuck your ethnicity. The 2 characters from before, Keisha and Tammy, also have their own respective songs. Tammy's song, Her Evils, and Keisha's song, Her Pain. In those songs, Kendrick talks about the mistreatment of women and how women in disadvantaged areas are often forced into prostitution. Also in the album, Kendrick talks about things like drug abuse and racism, like on the tracks ADHD and High Power. Upon release, this album was fairly well received. However, nobody yet knew just how big Kendrick would become. Not too long after the release of Section 80, just over a year after in fact, Kendrick dropped his next album, which happens to be one of my favourite albums of all time, and he called it Good Kid, Mad City. GKMC is an album about Kendrick's younger life and the struggles and adversities that he went through, including crime, gangs, drugs, and more. The acronym of MAD in the album title actually has 3 meanings, one of which meaning the general word mad, second being my angry adolescent divided, and the third being my angels on angel dust. All 3 meanings make perfect sense, especially when considering what Kendrick is actually talking about on the album. His city, Compton, being mad, and then the other 2 meanings being about the struggles of him being young in that environment and how he was affected by drugs and the culture around it. The album itself is a masterclass in music. It brings some absolutely brilliant songs like Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, Backstreet Freestyle, The Art of Peer Pressure, Money Trees, and many, many more. However, I can't talk about this album without talking about one particular song. The song I consider to be my favourite song of all time. Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. The song, which was originally split into 2 different parts, one being Sing About Me, the other one being I'm Dying of Thirst, talks about things like gang culture, religion, and being remembered after death, also known as being sang about. However, as much as I want to go on about his album Song Forever, while Good Kid, Mad City is my personal favourite of Kendrick's albums and is considered one of the best hip hop albums of all the 2010s and often of all time, his next album, which was released 3 years later, is widely considered one of, if not the best albums of all time, and he named it To Pimp a Butterfly. TPAB is a 16-track, 78-minute and 51-second long, deep and dark metaphorical masterpiece that talks about the likes of racism, politics, discrimination, depression, and a lot more. I could easily sit here and make a multiple hour-long video purely just about this album. There is that much to talk about. The album uses multiple music styles, a lot of which being typically African-American styles like jazz, funk, and soul, which Kendrick combined and mixed into making this masterclass of a hip-hop album. The album starts off with what I would consider to be one of the best opening songs on an album ever, Wesley's Theory. This track talks about racism and about how American institutions, white supremacists, and the US government have tried to exploit and charm Kendrick and the black people of America. Every single track on this album is interesting. You and I talking about self-hatred and self-love, How Much a Dollar Cost tells the story of Kendrick dismissing a homeless man asking for money, but Kendrick tries to drive away, but the man reveals that he is God and that the dollar was the price of his place in heaven, and because of how Kendrick's selfishness, he has now lost that. To round off the album, we are given Mortal Man. Inspired by a trip to South Africa that Kendrick took in 2014, he mentions people like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Moses. Towards the end of the song, we hear Kendrick interviewing Tupac and they discuss racism, black culture, and fame. During this, Kendrick realizes that he is the next in the long line of these men, and that, just like those before him, he has a limited time. But he knows that, in that time, he has to reach out to the teenagers today and try and motivate them to change the world. Almost a year after TPAB was released, Kendrick released Untitled Unmastered. Untitled Unmastered is a compilation album of songs and demos that were originally recorded and planned to be a part of TPAB, but due to the album's intricacy, he didn't put them in, instead releasing them in this compilation album. 2 years after TPAB's release, Kendrick Lamar dropped his Darkest Opus, an album that feels like a David Fincher film, exploring deep and dark themes, presented like a cinematic experience. Damn. Damn is such an interesting album as the story that plays out is so intricate it's crazy. I would very happily sit here and tell you about every song and about the overarching story and how they all link in together, but unfortunately that easily could be 2 hours alone, so I don't have the time, so I can try to summarise. At the start of the album we hear this.
Is a wickedness. Is a weakness. You decide. Are we gonna live or die?
This is very important. When listening to this album, you can hear the story of Kendrick going from a young boy who isn't religious and gets into dangerous things like gang culture, drugs, etc. But then, as the album progresses, he clearly grows and matures, making him the more righteous and religious person that he is today. This is the weakness that he refers to at the start of the album. However, on the last song of the album, and personally what I consider to be the best song of the album, Duckworth, something very interesting happens. The story of the song is incredible. However, when you dig deeper and listen to it a few times, you often hear the phrase reverse. It is explicitly said in the song, and at the end of the song, the whole album plays in reverse. There is a reason for this. That reason links back to that question at the start. Is it wickedness? Is it weakness? You decide. As I mentioned before, listening to the album normally, you're hearing the story of weakness. So what is this wickedness part referring to? Well, the brilliant twist of this album is that when we are told, you decide, we the audience are the ones that are actually being addressed there, as we have heard the weakness story, but we can decide to listen to the wickedness story if we listen to the album in reverse order. This tells the story of wickedness, in which Kendrick's dad dies at the start, and so Kendrick goes from being this righteous man to becoming someone involved in gangs and drugs, eventually resulting in Kendrick's death in blood. It is so interesting to me how well the album all fits together and it makes perfect sense when listening to it in reverse order. I just love that. It just proves to me how good of a storyteller Kendrick is, even though we didn't need any proof. Damn was released in 2017. However, we wouldn't get another album for Kendrick for 5 years. We would be seeing some appearances, like him being a feature on Baby Keem's Family Ties and in the soundtrack for 2018's Black Panther, but nothing big. No studio album. Until it happened. Finally, in 2022, Kendrick released Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, his 5th and most recent studio album. Like TPAB, Mr. Morale is quite a long album, standing at 19 songs at over 73 minutes. This is a much more personal album for Kendrick, as he talks a lot about family life with his children and wife, and there's also a lot about his journey being in therapy. It is his most divisive album, as some people really like the more personal and slow approach, but some less so. It is clearly more sentimental than his other work, which I think is refreshing. You can understand it a lot better from listening to it than you can to me, so go listen to it. And that's pretty much it. We haven't heard much from Kendrick since, well, apart from the Drake beef, which started not long after I started writing the script, but also finished after I finished writing the script, so I was already making a video, so then it's kind of awkward for me to add it in. I thought I'd just leave it out. You guys can go find a video on it somewhere. I'm sure there's other people that have made great videos on it on YouTube or something. Go find it. I'm sure they'll do a great job. I would have loved to go into more detail, but that would have taken fucking ages. I would love to just go into such deep detail about every single thing, but I couldn't because it was taking ages, and it made the video hours long, which I didn't have time to do because this was actually for a college project, so I didn't have time to do that. But if you really want the details, again, I'm sure there's people that have made much more detailed videos and much longer videos than I've made, so I'm sure they're great and you can go check them out. But anyway, I've loved making this, and I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to do that, and thank you so much for watching, and just have a good day, man. Thank you so much.